Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I think that what we have here today is a debate which, and I think Jackie Baillie in her speech spent a large part of the first section of her speech talking about things that didn't appear in the Labour Party's motion around some of the economic areas of policy, and then got into, I think, the substance of what the Labour Party wants to debate. Now, Mr Mason is quite right that the information that Spice have provided suggests that £13 million is what would be achieved by the levelling of a 50p top rate of income tax in Scotland. So it doesn't meet, at the very first instance, the £25 million that Labour say they would use via a 50p top rate. And even beyond that, if we look at the numbers of staff that are talked about in the motion for being employed, also there is a question as to whether or not the sums add up in that respect as well, both for a £13 million, if that was what you raised, but even beyond that to a £25 million if you were to include on costs as well. But I think the debate essentially, the sort of centrifugal point of this debate is the inequality agenda and how best to tackle that. And I don't dispute that the notion that education is a means by which people can escape the trapping effect of inequality. That, I think, is well understood. But what you're talking about there is a situation where you are essentially doing something in spite of an individual's circumstances, rather than materially changing them to improve their outcomes as a consequence. If what you're saying is that we need to focus our efforts into these areas and work against the the external factors that are affecting children's educational outcomes, then I would agree that that is something that we have to do, and based on the evidence at the moment, is something that the Cabinet Secretary herself has said that she wishes to do. But you also have to then look at how you address those external factors that are impacting upon those children, on those families, on those communities. Because while we want absolutely to have those children get the best possible educational outcomes, we also want to ensure that the lifestyles that exist around those children are materially improved. It cannot simply be the case, perhaps a little bit later, I just want to develop the point a little bit further, Mr Giffen. It cannot simply be the case that we say that we will work to help those children to escape the situations in which they find themselves as a result of the inequalities that exist within society, and that will therefore resolve those inequalities, because there are adults, there are family networks, there are communities which are affected by those deep inequalities that simply working through the education system alone will not resolve. And so it goes wider than that. And before I move on to the wider section, I'll take Mr Griffin's intervention.
Mike Griffin.
Thank Mr McDonald. I take his point on the wider issues affecting poverty, but does he not agree that by focusing resources in that area that we start to break people out of that cycle, that vicious cycle of poverty, and that education in itself is a way to tackle poverty, not overnight, but on a generational basis?
Mark McDonald.
No disagreement from me on that, and I think I made that point earlier on in my speech. I mean, I represent a constituency which has poverty amidst plenty. My constituency office is based in one of the most deprived communities in the city of Aberdeen, but also within my constituency I have communities which have less than 5% child poverty rates. So I recognise the need to ensure that resources are focused on those areas that need intervention. And that's what brings me on to the other aspect of this when we're looking at the inequality agenda. And it's about the economy, it's about employment, it's about creating the circumstances whereby individuals in these communities can access well-paid, sustainable employment. And that is what brought me to the intervention that I raised with Jackie Baillie, because I'm not one of these folk who sees the debate simply being more powers is the answer to everything. But at the same time, you have to look at where the powers rest that can best tackle the societal inequalities that face these communities. Now, education, I agree absolutely, and I've said already that focusing on education is something we need to do, and the Cabinet Secretary has made that point very clearly. But beyond that as well, we have to then look at how we affect the material circumstances of individuals in these communities. How do we make people's incomes better? How do we make people's employment better? And one of the ways that we do that is through wage policy, is through employment policy, is through being able to take the measures to tackle things like, for example, exploitative zero-hours contracts, like being able to take steps around minimum wage policy and addressing that in a wider context than simply looking at a living wage which is narrowly defined to the public sector, because that's the only way that we can implement it at present. So until we are able to take that basket of measures forward as well, that is something that will hamstring some of the efforts, because teachers are doing a fantastic job in our communities, particularly in our deprived communities. But when a child arrives at the school gate with an empty belly because of the fact that their family has to rely on food banks, or when they are affected by circumstances outside of that classroom, the school is only ever going to be working in a situation where it is battling against external factors, not being able to develop that child's full potential. So I agree absolutely, focus on education, but we have to have a wider focus than simply education. Otherwise, those children and those schools will continue to be battling against external factors and not working to the best possible outcomes for the child.